Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I once lived a life of predictable comfort, waking early, catching my usual train, working at the local news station, and returning to my modest one-bedroom apartment in Brookside Heights. Every morning, I'd stop by the neighborhood coffee shop where familiar faces greeted me, and we casually discussed the day's headlines, the weather, and local sports. Life was uncomplicated, a series of reliable moments that made me feel secure. That all changed one evening. I had stayed late at the station, fine-tuning a script for an upcoming segment, and by the time I stepped out, the sky had turned an inky grey. A relentless storm had taken hold of the city, and the rain battered the sidewalks. I hurried to board the next subway train, seeking shelter from the downpour. Inside the crowded car, something felt off. I noticed the quiet exchange of worried looks among the passengers. In one corner sat a man clad in a worn hooded jacket, who was clearly struggling with a cough he couldn't quite hide. His discomfort wasn't something he could mask completely, and those around him instinctively shifted away, covering their faces as if trying to avoid an unseen threat. In that moment, it was clear that the routine I had always depended on was unraveling into something entirely unexpected. I recall that ride vividly because I later learned that was the last normal moment I ever had in my life. For the next few days, the news station exploded with emergency alerts. Rumors circulated about a fast-spreading illness, though nobody had official data yet. The city had endured health scares before, but this time felt different. Every broadcast station, including ours, urged citizens to remain calm. We were told that certain areas had been placed under temporary quarantine. Official statements insisted that everything was under control, but I could see the apprehension in the eyes of my co-workers. Within a week, official announcements confirmed that this illness was something beyond a typical outbreak. The early broadcasts used terms like unusual aggression and infection. I had never witnessed such intensity in the newsroom. Crew members whispered about entire neighborhoods sealing themselves off, barricading windows and doors. Eventually, the word zombie crept in, first as a rumor, then as a label. Viewers started calling in, sharing accounts of unsettling sightings, people with vacant gazes, moving in unnatural ways, fixated on attacking anyone who got too close. It seemed like scenes from a horror film, except the fear in everyone's voice was all too real. We tried to maintain professionalism at the station, but it was impossible to ignore the road closures, cancelled events, and endless sirens. Helicopters buzzed overhead, shining spotlights on the streets below. My supervisor, Diana Lowe, attempted to keep us focused on broadcasting accurate updates. She was a no-nonsense woman with a calm demeanor. Even she had trouble hiding the worry in her voice when we went live. Despite the chaos, the city leadership announced that certain subway stations would be converted into safe zones. Train operators volunteered to shuttle civilians to these protected hubs. It became a critical operation, especially when the roads above began clogging with stalled vehicles and abandoned buses. I spent my final shift on air doing everything I could to explain evacuation procedures. The plan was for civilians to gather at designated stations, where they would find medical personnel, security teams, and supplies. The next morning, I noticed the entire city smelled like damp concrete and desperation. Rain had washed out certain roads, pushing even more people below ground. The subways turned from commuting networks into lifelines. I left the station that day around noon, too wired to sleep, too anxious to stay put. I only had one goal: reach the nearest safe station. The place I chose was Burlington Station, 2 stops from the main city hub. Officials had promised a strong security presence there. I packed a small duffel with essentials, 2 changes of clothes, protein bars, a flashlight, and a set of radio batteries. On my way out the door, I grabbed my old press pass and phone charger, hoping to keep some link to the outside world. When I arrived at Burlington Station, I met a volunteer named Morgan. She wore a yellow vest marked Community Response and introduced herself as a nurse from St. Augustus Hospital. She had a wide smile despite the obvious strain in her eyes. Morgan guided me through the checkpoint, where a few local security officers were stationed. One of them, Officer Daniels, took down my information, scanned my identification, and advised me to remain in the waiting area. He offered a bottle of water and some reassurance that help was on the way. While I waited, I observed hundreds of people crowding the corridors. Some held duffel bags like mine, others clung to family members or pets. A few people were wrapped in blankets, staring off into the distance, possibly in shock from whatever they had witnessed outside. The overhead speakers played looped announcements about hygiene precautions and maintaining a safe distance if anyone showed signs of infection. It was a miserable sight, but still, we believed we were secure down there. Within hours, more civilians arrived, each carrying stories of chaos up on the streets. They spoke of sirens blaring non-stop, store windows shattered, and flickering power in entire districts. According to them, city officials were requesting civilians to remain inside or take refuge underground. In those moments, the flickering fluorescent lights, endless lines of anxious survivors, and the stale underground air made the station feel like the last semblance of civilization. Our phones buzzed with urgent notifications, urging everyone to stay put until rescue services could organize further evacuations. I tried to keep myself occupied by speaking with a young mechanic named Caleb. He had been helping train operators service the subway cars so they could transport more people out. Caleb explained that the city intended to move civilians through the tunnels in shifts. Supplies were being gathered at each station. He also mentioned that every plan relied on the power grid. If that failed, we'd be stranded. At the time, none of us predicted just how bad it would get. On the second day, the staff posted new guidelines on the station's walls. The text was clear. Do not go outside. The zombie virus is spreading. We were asked to conserve water, use restrooms sparingly, and avoid wandering alone in restricted areas. Rumors spread that certain stations had already fallen silent, overrun by the infected. When I tried to confirm these rumors with Officer Daniels, he merely pressed his lips together and said he couldn't discuss unverified reports. Late that afternoon, a middle-aged woman named Nina stumbled into the station, eyes wide with concern. She was searching for her daughter Mia, a teenager who had been separated from her during the mad dash underground. Nina had a small bruise on her forehead and explained she had barely escaped an encounter with a group of infected near the escalators. Morgan examined the bruise, cleaned a minor scrape on Nina's arm, and promised to do her best to keep an eye out for Mia. Even amid the chaos, there were moments of collective compassion. People offered seats, blankets, and whatever solace they could give. I tried to comfort Nina by saying we would help find her daughter. The thought that an innocent teenager might be lost somewhere made the entire disaster more personal. That night, the station lights flickered every now and then, fueling the tension. In the distance, we heard mechanical clangs that suggested the city was losing its grip on the power infrastructure. A generator rumbled somewhere in the bowels of the station. It was enough to provide minimal lighting, but not enough to silence the growing anxiety. Every so often, staff members would hustle past in reflective vests, whispering instructions about reinforcing doors and tunnels. On the third day, we got word that rescue trains had begun departing from the main hub deeper into the system, heading toward Redwood Terminal. From there, some were rumored to continue toward the outskirts of the city, possibly venturing beyond the quarantined areas. Officers announced that a train would arrive at Burlington Station soon. Immediately, hundreds of people pressed toward the edges of the platforms, forming lines that extended into the corridors. I joined the mass, my duffel slung over my shoulder, and decided to remain close to Nina so we could keep an eye out for Mia together. Morgan stood nearby, trying to guide people calmly. The tension in the crowd intensified with each passing moment. When the train finally arrived, it felt like the arrival of a lifeboat in a storm. Even though the overhead lights dimmed with each train movement, that roaring engine felt like hope. Doors opened, and uniformed personnel waved us forward. I found myself being ushered into a crowded car with Nina and Morgan. Caleb ended up in an adjacent car, with a promise that we'd all reconnect once the train reached Redwood Terminal. We were told this route would bypass several stations to reduce delays. As the train lurched forward, the automated announcement system repeated safety reminders, though it cut in and out. Sitting on those orange plastic seats with so many frightened individuals around me felt surreal. I noticed how everyone clutched personal belongings, wedding rings on necklaces, precious family photos, or battered backpacks. Nina kept glancing at the door, as if hoping Mia might appear at the last second. Morgan was scanning the crowd for any signs of an injury or unusual demeanor. Officer Daniels stood near a door, one hand on his radio, the other resting near the sidearm on his belt. As we approached the next station, Anders Central, we heard a harsh screech, followed by frantic chatter on Officer Daniels' radio. The train slowed, and some of us peered out the windows. The platform was in disarray. Suitcases and abandoned sleeping bags were scattered everywhere. We glimpsed shadowy figures moving near the far end. Someone flipped a spotlight in that direction, revealing the silhouettes of the infected. They seemed to be scouring the dark corners, searching. Even from inside the train, we could sense the urgency of the situation. The train's driver announced that the station was compromised, and we would not be opening the doors. Tension skyrocketed. Some passengers called out, asking if anyone was left alive in that station. But we had no way to find out. The train powered through, leaving Anders Central behind. Everyone stared out the windows until the darkness of the tunnel swallowed the view. We relied on the overhead lights inside the train, which flickered ominously. An older man in a tattered jacket softly asked if we had enough fuel to make the final journey. Another passenger shushed him, not wanting to add to the growing sense of dread. The train rumbled on for another 10 minutes when the power abruptly cut. The entire car went dark. Emergency lights along the floor flickered to life, bathing everything in a soft red glow. There was a collective gasp, followed by quiet sobs. The driver's voice echoed through the speakers. "We have lost primary power, attempting to switch to backup." We all sat still, bracing ourselves for any sign of movement. Then the train rolled to a stop. A moment later, all lighting went out. We were immersed in total darkness. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then flashlights clicked on, illuminating pale, frightened faces. Officer Daniels used his radio to contact the front. The driver's reply was muffled by static. We caught phrases like electrical system failure and generator offline. Eventually, it became clear that we were stuck. The driver instructed everyone to remain calm while they worked to restore power. Minutes turned to an hour, yet the train didn't move. Morgan distributed small medical masks and reminded people to stay hydrated. The air became stale. Nina clung to a small photo of her daughter, tears welling in her eyes. At some point, we heard scuffling sounds outside the train. Faint echoes bounced around the tunnel. Officer Daniels spoke quietly over the radio, trying to figure out if it was more survivors or something else. With only a few flashlights among us, it was hard to see beyond a few feet through the windows. A set of emergency instructions was posted in each car, indicating there was a manual door release if the train lost power. However, stepping onto the tracks was never recommended unless absolutely necessary. After another hour of waiting, people began to debate leaving the train to find an emergency exit. There was no confirmation about how long it would take for help to arrive, or if the train's power could be restored. Tension rose among the passengers. Some insisted it was safer to stay put, reasoning that the train was at least a sealed container keeping us away from anything that might lurk in the darkness. Others, especially those who felt claustrophobic or worried about running out of supplies, pushed to open the doors and walk along the tunnels to the nearest station. Officer Daniels, Morgan, and a handful of other level-headed individuals tried to organize a plan. They laid out potential scenarios. If we left the train, we might find an exit ladder or cross tunnel leading to another station. However, Nobody knew if the next station was secure. Moreover, the tunnels could be filled with infected. Still, many argued that staying for too long would be equally risky. People grew restless, especially those with small children. Eventually, a vote was held. About half believed waiting for rescue was best, and the other half wanted to move. Nina gripped my arm and pleaded with me to help her search the tunnels, hoping we might find Mia, or at least a path to a safer location. Morgan also volunteered to go, partly out of concern for Nina, and partly because she felt the group staying in the train would manage better if the rest of us scouted ahead. In the end, a group of 7 decided to leave. We packed water, flashlights, and anything that could serve as a makeshift defense. Officer Daniels insisted on going along to maintain order and keep the group safe. We opened the emergency exit manually, sliding the heavy door with a grating sound. Darkness spilled into the car like a silent wave, and the stale underground air struck us. We stepped onto the tracks, hyper-aware of how vulnerable we were. As soon as we left the relative safety of the train, I felt the eerie silence of the tunnel. Water dripped from overhead pipes, forming shallow puddles along the tracks. We saw rusted maintenance doors along the walls, each padlocked. The emergency lighting in the tunnel was out, so we relied entirely on flashlights. Our group walked single file, trying not to trip on loose rails or debris. Caleb, who had been in the other car, joined us at the last moment, saying he preferred taking a chance on foot. He had a small toolkit and a crowbar looped on his belt, which eased my nerves a bit. We had to pass through a tight service walkway that connected different sections of the line. The corridor had a musky smell, and only enough space for us to move in pairs. Morgan led the way, shining her flashlight on the walls so we could read signs. Every so often, we paused to listen for any unusual sounds. For a while, it seemed like we were alone down there. Then, in the distance, we heard a metallic scraping, followed by a faint moan. It was impossible to tell how far away it was. Our group pressed on, each person looking from side to side. At one point, Caleb found a locked maintenance hatch that he managed to pry open. Inside, we discovered a small storeroom with a few leftover supplies, reflective vests, batteries, and a partial medical kit. Morgan took the kit, grateful for bandages and antiseptics. Nina whispered that she hoped Mia might have found a similar place to take shelter. The mention of her daughter's name brought a hushed silence to our group. We continued through the tunnel for another half hour, guided by a few glow sticks Officer Daniels had found. Their greenish light gave an otherworldly hue to the surroundings. The station walls had graffiti and chipped paint, remnants of a world that felt long gone. At times, an echo of water dripping caused us all to freeze in place, hearts thrumming with anticipation. But we pushed forward, determined to find a way out. Eventually we saw a faint light around a bend. We approached cautiously, uncertain whether it came from an emergency fixture or something else. As we neared, we recognized the outline of a partially collapsed ceiling. Rubble blocked part of the tunnel, but a single flickering lamp above a security door cast a weak glow. Officer Daniels tested the door. It was locked. He tried to radio the train, but static drowned out the signal. Frustration crept in as we realized how cut off we were. We spent a few minutes searching the debris for a possible route. While rummaging through twisted beams and broken concrete, Morgan discovered a side passage that seemed to bypass the collapsed area. It was cramped and required us to crawl over some rubble. We decided to check it out, with Caleb going first due to his flashlight and crowbar. The space was so narrow that we had to pass our bags forward, one at a time. About 15 feet in, the passage opened into a storage hallway that branched left and right. Old posters advertising city events were taped to the walls. Everything was caked in dust. Our group regrouped, shining flashlights in both directions. We spotted a sign reading, "Maintenance stairwell, east 90 feet. It pointed to the right. That seemed like our best bet for an exit. We kept our formation, stepping quietly, uncertain what we'd find around each corner. Then, a sudden noise made us stop. It was a low, ragged sound that came from around the next bend, accompanied by a scuffling of feet. Officer Daniels gestured for us to move slowly. We inched forward, flashlights angled downward, not wanting to draw too much attention. Then we saw them, 2 individuals wearing torn clothing, leaning against the wall in front of a locked gate. Their bodies were still, but their faces were hidden by the dim light. At first, we thought they might be regular survivors in shock. Nina quietly called out, hoping for any sign of recognition. Their heads jerked up. In that brief moment, we saw milky, unfocused eyes. They let out a guttural noise. Our group reflexively backed away, but the 2 figures started moving toward us with unnatural determination. Officer Daniels spoke calmly, trying to command them to stand down, but it was clear they were no longer responsive. One of them had an arm that looked disjointed, but it didn't seem to slow it down. The other had a large tear in their shirt, and the skin beneath was discolored. Our flashlights shook as they advanced. Morgan tried to maintain composure, telling everyone to keep behind Officer Daniels. He drew his sidearm and asked them to stop. For a second, it looked like they might. Then they lunged. Daniels discharged 2 rounds into the air, but it did nothing to halt their approach. It was at that point Caleb rushed forward with the crowbar, creating a barrier so our group could retreat down the hallway. The 2 infected didn't stop, pressing toward us. Daniels took swift action, redirecting them away from the group, and Morgan pulled Nina back before she could get any closer. We rushed around the corner we came from, hearts in our throats. Once we were safely out of immediate sight, we realized that route was no longer an option. The infected blocked the path to the maintenance stairwell. We had no idea how many more might be nearby. Desperate, we doubled back to the rubble-filled tunnel, scrambling over concrete chunks and twisted metal beams. After several attempts to navigate the collapsed area in the dark, we found ourselves on the opposite side of the rubble from where we started, though we weren't sure if we had gone in a circle or actually found a new path. Gradually, we made our way to a place where the tunnel opened up enough for us to stand upright. I could see battered benches, indicating this might have been an abandoned service area. The overhead lights were out, save for a single emergency lamp flickering near a bench. Officer Daniels and Morgan checked on Nina, who was shaking from the near confrontation. Caleb knelt by a broken vending machine, trying to pry it open for any leftover snacks. Every so often, we heard muffled moans in the distance. While searching the area, I noticed an old map pinned under shattered glass on the wall. It showed a network of tunnels, color-coded lines, and station markers. A note had been scribbled across one of the lines, "Flooded, do not enter." Another note read, "Exit S2, leads to surface." S2 was 2 corridors away, if the map was accurate. I called over Daniels, who quickly studied the layout. Hope sparked in his voice as he considered the possibility of leading us to that surface exit. Our group decided to try for S2. We moved carefully, staying together. Along the way, the floor became slick with water seeping from overhead pipes. A musty odor lingered in the air, probably from mold and stagnant moisture. At each intersection, we paused to listen for movement. At one turn, we found a shattered overhead light with wires dangling precariously. A piece of signage indicated we were nearing S2. Adrenaline pushed us forward. When we finally reached the S2 exit door, it was locked with a heavy deadbolt. We used our remaining crowbar leverage to try to snap it. Caleb applied pressure until the metal started to bend. Morgan found a maintenance rod to help. After a few attempts, the lock gave way with a loud snap. We collectively exhaled, feeling a hint of relief. We opened the door and discovered a concrete stairwell spiraling upward. Faint sunlight leaked down from above, implying that somewhere at the top there was an opening to the surface. We ascended, stepping over debris, wary of every echo. The steps were cracked in some places, forcing us to watch our footing. Nina kept glancing upward, as if the next landing might finally reunite her with Mia. At a landing near the top, we found a metal gate that had been wedged shut with wooden planks. Someone had attempted to barricade this area from the inside. With combined effort, we pried the boards loose. Dust fell from the ceiling and the entire stairwell felt unstable. Once we cleared the barricade, we entered a small corridor leading to what looked like a city street entrance. At the far end, a heavy metal door bore the words, "Authorized personnel only." This seemed to be the official exit. Sunlight filtered through narrow vents near the ceiling, a sign that we were close to the outside world. Our excitement was tempered by the knowledge that the outside world was no longer safe. Regardless, we pushed forward. The door had a push bar on the inside, but it felt jammed. Officer Daniels used his shoulder to force it. After a few tries, the door gave way, flooding the corridor with the dull grey light of late afternoon. We stepped out into an alley behind a row of tall buildings. Piles of trash bags were stacked near a dented dumpster, and water dripped from a broken gutter. The city skyline loomed overhead, overshadowed by a thick haze. The streets beyond the alley were eerily silent, though we could faintly hear emergency sirens in the distance. A few broken windows hinted at the disorder that had taken over. Our group huddled together, uncertain whether we were safer out here or back in the tunnels. Caleb examined the surrounding area, while Nina craned her neck, calling quietly for her daughter. Morgan approached a battered news kiosk. The front page of a newspaper displayed an alarming headline about the spread of the infection. From the date, it appeared that the paper was at least 2 days old. Officer Daniels used his radio again, hoping to reach any local authorities or rescue teams. All we heard was static. He tried different frequencies, but none responded. Unsure of where to go, we decided to seek higher ground to get a better view. We moved out of the alley, staying close to building walls, mindful of every alley intersection. Debris littered the sidewalks, broken glass, overturned cars, and stray belongings. The air felt thick with tension. Even from a distance, certain roads were blocked by abandoned vehicles. We found ourselves navigating side streets, always on alert for any sign of movement. Though it seemed quiet, we knew that the infected could appear at any moment. Morgan suggested we try to find an apartment building or a hotel with multiple floors. If we could get to a rooftop, we might spot any sign of an active rescue effort. We saw a tall brick building with a sign that read Tyler Suites. Its windows were mostly intact. The front door hung off its hinges, but we saw no immediate movement inside. Our group formed a tight formation and entered the lobby. Furniture was overturned, and bits of plaster had fallen from the ceiling. A faint beep echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, possibly an alarm that never got turned off. We located a stairwell and began the trek upward. On the second-floor landing, we passed a corridor lined with apartment doors. Some were ajar, revealing living spaces that looked hastily abandoned. Photographs, half-packed suitcases, and scattered personal items lay on the floor. Out of respect and caution, we didn't linger. Nobody wanted an encounter with any infected that might be lurking inside. Finally, we reached the top floor. A metal ladder led to a hatch marked Roof Access. The hatch was locked, so Caleb used his crowbar again. After some effort, it creaked open. We climbed onto the rooftop, greeted by a sight of the city that left us speechless. Smoke rose from various sections of the skyline. Helicopters hovered near the commercial district, shining spotlights on empty streets. Occasional bursts of emergency lights blinked from far away, but we couldn't see any organized military presence, at least from our vantage point. It was as if the entire city was in a state of suspended chaos. Nina gazed out, searching for any hint of her daughter. She clutched that small photo with trembling hands. Morgan tried to scan the rooftops with binoculars she had taken from the storage room earlier. Officer Daniels paced near the roof's edge, muttering plans about finding a police station or a possible safe zone. Caleb looked exhausted, crouching by a vent, crowbar in hand. We were all trying to process what we had seen and what our next steps would be. I approached the roof's ledge to get a better look at the major streets below. Cars were jammed bumper to bumper. Some had their doors open, left in the middle of the road. Stray pieces of paper blew between them. There were no large groups of people, no lines of evacuation buses. Everything seemed deserted. It made me question whether we were truly the only ones left in this sector. At that moment, Morgan's radio crackled. A garbled voice tried to break through the static. We all rushed towards her, hopeful for some sort of communication. The voice was faint but distinct enough that we caught certain words. Relocation, quarantine, Redwood Terminal. Daniels grabbed the radio, but the signal faded. It was enough to confirm that Redwood Terminal was still an objective for rescue teams. We had planned to get there by train, but now it appeared we'd have to do it on foot. We spent the next hour discussing plans. The group decided that traveling above ground might be just as dangerous as returning to the tunnels. However, Redwood Terminal was rumored to be the final staging point for evacuations. We needed to find a way there, or at least figure out if it still stood. Morgan and Daniels debated the merits of returning underground, given that we had just escaped infected individuals in the tunnel. Caleb argued that crossing the city streets might be even worse, especially if the infected roamed freely. Nina wanted to search for Mia above ground, reasoning that her daughter might have hidden in a building. In the end, we resolved to rest for a short while on the rooftop. It was relatively secure, and we could take turns keeping watch. We rationed some water bottles and protein bars. Officer Daniels used a piece of chalk to mark a potential route on the rooftop floor, based on the city's layout we had pieced together from memory and the old map. The plan was to move carefully along the edges of neighborhoods, possibly ducking into accessible subway entrances to avoid large infected clusters. We hoped Redwood Terminal would have running trains or at least a well-guarded outpost. Before we settled in, we scouted each corner of the rooftop. Morgan discovered a small utility shed. Inside were some worn blankets, a half-empty toolbox, and random supplies like nails and duct tape. These small items felt like treasures. Caleb even found a jar of peanut butter in a battered box. It was enough to lift our spirits, if only slightly. That night, each of us found a corner on the rooftop to rest. The city below was eerily silent, interrupted by the occasional far-off siren or the faint flutter of helicopter blades. I couldn't sleep, so I sat with Nina, listening to her recount stories of her daughter's love for music and her dream of joining an orchestra. Nina had tears in her eyes as she described how they were separated during the initial rush to get underground. I tried to offer comfort, though I had nothing concrete to promise. Officer Daniels took the first watch. Morgan dozed lightly, leaning on her duffel bag. Caleb huddled near the ladder, crowbar by his side. The night air felt cold against my face. I kept replaying the moment we had to leave the train, wondering if it had been the right choice. Memories of the infected figures blocking our path came back to me. I realized how quickly everything had spiraled from an organized evacuation effort to this desperate race for survival. At some point, I must have drifted off. Morning arrived with a pale, overcast sky. We gathered what little we had, prepared for a risky journey across the city. As we lowered ourselves back into the building, I kept thinking about the tunnels. The memory of that darkness, the flickering lights of the train, and the throngs of terrified passengers had etched itself into my mind. I wondered if any help had reached them, or if more infected had poured in. Part of me felt guilty for leaving them behind, even though there seemed no other way. We exited Tyler Suites through a side entrance, stepping onto a cracked sidewalk. Patches of weeds grew through the concrete. Wind rustled loose paper scraps, swirling them around our feet. We kept ourselves low, trying to remain inconspicuous. Several blocks away, an intersection was blocked by toppled vehicles. Broken glass littered the pavement. As we approached, we saw no immediate movement, but we stayed vigilant. Further down, a sports utility vehicle had plowed into a street lamp, its trunk still half open with scattered luggage on the ground. Our group adopted a silent system of hand signals to communicate. If anyone saw something suspicious, they would raise a fist. If it was clear, they would wave forward. This quiet approach saved us from a direct encounter when we glimpsed several infected near an abandoned gas station. They shuffled aimlessly among the pumps, occasionally looking around, as if searching for signs of life. We crouched behind a tall hedge until they wandered off, then continued past the station on a parallel street. In this manner, we covered multiple blocks. We tried to check every now and then for open shops or clinics that might contain supplies, but many doors had been forced open. Shelves were ransacked. We found only a few stray items, like a small can of fruit and a single roll of medical gauze. Morgan was particularly careful to use some antiseptic on every small cut or scrape any of us sustained. She emphasized that any wound could become a problem without proper treatment. As we reached a commercial district, we saw a large building that used to be a department store. Its massive glass entrance was shattered, shards covering the lobby. We decided to carefully explore it, hoping there might be a staff area with a first aid cabinet. The interior felt cavernous and silent. Mannequins lay tipped over, some missing limbs. The escalators were frozen in place, lights off. Our footsteps echoed softly against the tile floor. While we navigated deeper, we stumbled across another group of survivors. They were huddled near what looked like a makeshift barricade of metal shelving. Immediately, we called out in a calm tone, identifying ourselves. They emerged cautiously, a man and a woman, both appearing exhausted. They introduced themselves as Thomas and Marisol. They had tried to leave the city by car, but got stuck in a traffic jam near the center. They made it on foot to this store and had been hiding for days. They warned us that large numbers of infected had been seen in the area, especially near the main roads. Officer Daniels explained our plan to reach Redwood Terminal. Thomas and Marisol asked to join us. We agreed, realizing that sticking together increased our chances. Their presence added new worries, though. We had limited supplies, and more people meant more resources needed. Still, leaving them behind wasn't an option. With our expanded group, we exited the department store through a side exit. The cityscape ahead looked like a series of concrete canyons, each street lined with idle vehicles. We set our sights on Redwood Terminal, though we could only guess its direction by the skyline silhouette. From time to time, we spotted movement on upper floors of nearby buildings, others possibly peering out from windows. But we never stayed to investigate, unsure if they were friend or foe. Around midday, our progress was slowed by a large intersection that we absolutely had to cross. An overturned city bus blocked most of it. We approached with caution, but the area was eerily quiet. Shattered glass covered the pavement. While Caleb scouted ahead, I looked through the bus's broken windows, only to see empty seats and random belongings. A child's shoe lay near the driver's seat. There was no sign of the occupant. As we cleared the front of the bus, we noticed multiple infected moving around a cluster of cars on the opposite side of the intersection. We froze, slipping behind the wreck for cover. There must have been 6 or 7. They were wandering slowly, occasionally bumping into car doors. The group included one that still wore a battered security uniform from some private company. Their movements were halting, yet they seemed alert enough to notice if we made noise. We had to find a way around them without drawing attention. We decided to backtrack to a narrow alley and circle around. Carefully, we shuffled away from the intersection, stepping over broken asphalt and avoiding any rattling debris. Despite our precautions, a clatter of falling metal echoed somewhere behind us. Someone must have nudged a loose pipe. Immediately, low groans reverberated through the air. We hurried down the alley, forced to weave around garbage bins and stacks of crates. The infected figures were now alerted. We heard shuffling footsteps drawing closer. Nina gripped my arm, breathing in short bursts. Morgan tried to keep the group calm, reminding everyone to move quietly but quickly. We managed to navigate the alley until we found another cross street. Officer Daniels signaled for us to slip into the back door of a boarded-up diner. Inside, the place was in disarray. Chairs overturned, the smell of stale food lingering. We quietly bolted the door, hoping the infected would lose our trail. We agreed to wait a few minutes, listening for any signs outside. The only sounds were our muffled breathing and the faint hum of the wind. After a tense stretch of time, it seemed they had moved on. We took the opportunity to catch our breath. Marisol found a few sealed juice cartons in the diner's storage closet, which felt like a small victory. Morgan distributed them, ensuring Nina got one to maintain her energy. The group was on edge, but we pressed on, aware that Redwood Terminal was still far away. We eventually left the diner through a side window, using a piece of plywood as a makeshift ramp over broken glass. By dusk, we reached an overpass that stretched across several lanes of a highway, leading to Redwood Terminal. This was a major route. Before the outbreak, it would have been packed with rush-hour traffic. Now it was deserted, except for scattered vehicles and trash. We climbed onto the overpass, scanning for movement. In the distance, we spotted a large structure with tall lights, likely Redwood Terminal. A wave of relief swept through the group. Our excitement dimmed when we saw that the entrance ramps to the terminal area were littered with abandoned cars, some with doors flung wide. Smoke rose from at least one burnt-out vehicle. There were no uniformed guards visible, no signs directing us to safety zones. It was a stark contrast to the official bulletins we had seen days earlier. Still, Redwood Terminal remained our best chance. We descended from the overpass, stepping carefully to avoid making too much noise. As we neared the wide plaza in front of the terminal, we took in the sight of smashed windows and deserted kiosks. The large arched entrance to Redwood Terminal stood with broken glass, open to the elements. Off to one side, a row of turnstiles was toppled over. Discarded suitcases, boxes of supplies, and tattered banners lay strewn about. It looked like an evacuation effort had been attempted but never finished. Thomas and Caleb led the way inside, scanning the shadows with flashlights. A hush fell over us. The ticket counters were vacant. Rows of plastic seats sat empty. A few flickering overhead lights provided minimal illumination, revealing corridors that led down to the subway lines. We whispered to each other, deciding to explore carefully in search of any remaining staff, rescue teams, or working trains. Officer Daniels took the radio out, but it produced nothing but static. We split into smaller pairs to cover more ground, agreeing to regroup near the main lobby in a short while. Morgan and Nina moved toward what looked like a medical post sign. Caleb, Thomas, and Marisol checked the supply area. Officer Daniels and I took a corridor marked Track 3-4, scanning for any sign of a functional subway car. The entire terminal smelled like old dust and faint chemicals, possibly from spilled cleaning supplies. As Daniels and I ventured deeper, the corridor lights went out completely. We relied on flashlights again. The track area was wide, with tall ceilings. Metal staircases led down to the platforms. We tested the steps, which creaked slightly under our weight. At the bottom, we saw 2 trains parked with doors open. They appeared lifeless, no sign of active power. A few overhead lamps flickered, casting the large space in sporadic illumination. I called out softly, hoping maybe someone was working to restore power. There was no reply. We could hear water dripping from overhead. Then, from somewhere beyond the far end of the platform, a faint clang echoed. We exchanged glances, uncertain if it was just a random noise or something more. Officer Daniels motioned for me to hold position while he moved ahead. I stayed back, shining my flashlight along the length of the train cars. Most windows were dark, but the occasional reflection of my beam made it difficult to see if something was inside. Suddenly, Daniel stepped back into view, pressing a finger to his lips. He flicked his flashlight off. I did the same, letting our eyes adjust. A figure appeared from behind the last train car, silhouetted by the faint glow of an emergency light. It seemed to be a single individual, hunched over. They stumbled, as if unsteady. We couldn't tell if they were infected or a weary survivor. Daniels gestured for me to stay still. The figure let out a low groan. We slowly retreated up the platform steps, not wanting to draw attention. Once back in the corridor, we carefully retraced our steps to the main lobby. We found the rest of the group already there, each with similar stories of deserted areas and occasional noises. Morgan had discovered evidence that the medical post was used recently. Some wrappers, a half-empty saline bag, but no people. Caleb reported that many supply crates were gone, but he did find a partial case of water bottles. We stood in a loose circle, exchanging everything we had learned. Redwood Terminal was not the bustling rescue point we had hoped for. It might have been, once, but now it felt abandoned. We began brainstorming options, debating whether to try restoring power to the trains, search for a working generator, or fortify an area of the terminal and wait for help. The entire building was enormous, filled with potential hiding spots for the infected or other survivors. A sudden noise drew our attention. A dull thud resonated from a nearby corridor, followed by faint footsteps. Everyone froze. Thomas's expression changed to alarm, and he clicked off his flashlight. One by one, we followed suit, standing together in the dim glow of a single overhead lamp near the lobby ceiling. The footsteps approached slowly, echoing through the vast terminal. For a moment, we caught a glimpse of multiple figures stepping into view. It was impossible to discern if they were living or infected from our vantage point. They stood at the far end of the lobby, lit only by the flickering lamp. We exchanged worried glances. Officer Daniels unholstered his sidearm, making no sudden moves. Nina clutched the photo of her daughter, tears forming in her eyes, possibly fearing the worst. Morgan inched closer to provide comfort. Caleb and Thomas gripped whatever tools they had, bracing for a confrontation. We waited, tensely, to see if these figures would move closer or give some indication of their intent. The hush in the terminal was absolute. Dust motes drifted through the stale air. Our group tried to steady our breathing, staying together. My flashlight felt heavy in my hand, but I kept it off, not wanting to reveal our position any more than necessary. Time seemed suspended as we weighed our next step. Then, without warning, one of the figures let out a drawn-out moan. The others around it responded with a similar sound. They took a few uneven steps toward us. It was enough of a sign for us to realize they were infected. Our group exchanged rapid eye contact. Should we back away quietly or stand our ground? If we made a noise, more might be attracted. If we ran, we could walk right into another group. Tension mounted in that moment, the silent question passing between us: which path leads to survival? None of us knew what lay beyond Redwood Terminal's walls. The city above ground was teeming with unknown dangers, and the tunnels below offered more questions than answers. Redwood Terminal had become a crossroads, and every choice we faced felt like stepping onto thin ice. With only a few supplies and a fragile coalition of weary survivors, we stood there, hearts thumping, while the infected shapes began their slow, inexorable approach. Somewhere in the terminal, water dripped into a puddle. The overhead lamp flickered again, threatening to leave us in darkness. My grip on my flashlight tightened. Nina clutched the picture of Mia. Morgan braced herself, ready to help anyone wounded. Caleb and Thomas looked around for an escape route. Officer Daniels raised his sidearm, but none of us knew if we should engage or run. That was the moment I realized this was our reality now. Always one step away from catastrophe, always guessing whether the next corner hid friend or foe. I wondered if we would see the sunrise tomorrow, or if Redwood Terminal would become our final stand in a city devoured by the infection. With the creatures drawing nearer, we made our choice, and that is where I will leave this account. There are no neat endings in a world that has turned upside down. Whether we fought our way clear that night, or found an escape deeper into the system, is a story still unfolding. For anyone who finds this record, know that we tried to hold on to hope in the midst of uncertainty. And if you ever see the terminal's broken doors or hear distant moans echoing through dark corridors, remember the warning written on every bulletin: do not go outside. The zombie virus breached our last safe station. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, Stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.